Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss Made in Brazil because this is one of the top teams I haven't talked that much about. I did a recent episode of Counterpoints with Moses and Thorin and Lynx, and we talked a lot about Sports and Navi and Team Liquid, and even touched on, FaZe, but we didn't really talk about Made in Brazil. And I kind of want to talk about this team because they are starting to make a little bit of noise. They are starting to climb the rankings a little bit. Right now I think they're kind of hovering around number 4, number 5 in the world in most people's rankings. I think HLTV has them ranked number 4 as I record this video. Thorin just put out his rankings, had him listed number 5. Tend to agree that they're probably somewhere within this range, though I do wonder if FaZe has somewhat of a recovery. Maybe they could easily climb back up above Made in Brazil. Obviously, don't really know what's going on at Sports, but certainly teams like Astralis, Team Liquid certainly seem ahead of Made in Brazil. And even with Navi's flop at ESL1 New York, everything else that they've done has been far superior to anything that Made in Brazil has accomplished yet. So certainly those 3 teams are ahead of Made in Brazil. And we're kind of waiting to see what happens with teams like Made in Brazil in their own right, teams like Sports, teams like FaZe, maybe someone else in the top 10 as they try to climb to kind of see where Made in Brazil will sit for the long term. But for right now, they're certainly up there somewhere in the top 5, and they are chasing greatness. They're trying to become one of the best teams in the world. They have recently made a lot of moves to try to bring in additional firepower, bringing in people like Tarek and Stewie2K who are supposed to add to that ability, that fragging power of the team. They seem to somewhat be trying to take hints of their past strategically, but also trying to mix in faster pace, more explosive play, which is a little bit more reminiscent of maybe the Phelps lineup with Phelps and Furs, kind of a tag team duo, and Fallen taking a step back. There's a lot more elements of that than maybe kind of what they were known for during their greatest period. During the Taco and FNX lineup, when they had that great foundation of a slow methodical default with hints of innovation, of tactics, and all that good stuff. So they're taking kind of cues from different points in time of their different lineups over the last few years. And with all of this, Made in Brazil is attempting to chase after the legacy that some of the previous lineups have had, all the way down from Kaboom in 2015 when they broke into the scene, being Mirage map specialists, innovating a new tactic with the 5-smoke execute on the A-bomb side of Mirage that was getting them upsets. Then slowly over time, as they became Keyed Stars, as they became Luminosity, making different roster changes to get the roles right. They took cues from Zeus's Navi, the slow methodical default, and were able to really master that and really master roles and find really good roles and really good players to fit those roles and really have just a great routine at every point of a round, the different stages leading up to the crescendo at the end where you hopefully get the win. They definitely had everything nice and planned, and they were throwing in more innovation here and there, just like they had done as Kaboom and Mirage. They innovated this new cobblestone execute where they would smoke the APC, they would run up mid slope and actually split the B bomb site. The first team to do that. Definitely other little things thrown in there as well. Don't want to get too bogged down in that. But the point is that this team has a track record of hard work, of slowly growing, and at times have had extended periods of success. For instance, the Luminosity lineup that kind of came together towards the end of 2015 when FNX and Taco first joined and, lasted until very late 2016 is one of the greatest lineups of all time in CSGO history, next to like maybe Fnatic with Pronax in late 2014 and late 2015, next to what Astralis is doing now, next to the NIP of the original CSGO days back in, 2012, 2013, things like that. I mean, they had attended 17 LAN events in a year's period and made 11 finals out of those 17 LAN appearances. They won 5 of them, 2 were majors, and they had 4 other top 4 finishes there, so top 4 or better in 15 of the 17 LAN events they attended as a team. So that is certainly historically one of the greatest lineups out there, and definitely a hard target to try to hit for this team to try to live up to that type of success, but certainly something they're trying to hunt after. Hell, even the Phelps lineup originally was pretty good. I mean, they took second at DreamHack Vegas event, and after a rough patch at IEM Katowice and the Starlighter Season 3 finals, they won CS Summit, won IEM Sydney, took top 4 at the EPL Season 5 finals, won DreamHack Summer, won the ECS Season 3 finals, won ESL1 Cologne, and really didn't start struggling until, like PGL Krakow time period, but still managed to get a top 4 at ESL1 New York mixed into all of it. So even that lineup, with all of its pitfalls and shortcomings, still had success that this Made in Brazil team is chasing after, to be able to match that or surpass that. And even the Bolts lineup initially had a success when they won 3 out of their first 4 events. Some big events included in that, like Epicenter in the EPL Season 6 finals. and even, top 4 at IEM Oakland, for example. So still had some success there as well. And look, I'll even say this, with Stewie 2K during the SK time period as they transitioned into Made in Brazil, this team was really only losing to big name teams, except for big at Cologne. They were only losing to teams like Navi, FaZe, even Mouse Sports back when they were still really strong before they had dropped Sticko and brought in Stacks and that whole transition phase that we're going through now with Mouse Sports. Still, at least they were only falling to the best of the best, so to speak. But the point is they certainly faded from, this royalty that they had in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, where they were always seen as a top team. That had certainly slipped away, and that is what Made in Brazil is kind of going after again. So now I want to talk a little bit about how they can do that and what they've been doing so far to make that pursuit happen. Because let's be honest, again, we talked about how teams like Astralis, Navi, Team Liquid seem firmly up front right now, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be too much that'll shake that unless something happened with Navi's lineup. I mean, there was all those rumors flying around about Flamey, after the major. They were even practicing without him for a time leading up into New York, and there was a lot of rumblings about what would happen there. Certainly Simple and Flamey almost departed to join this Made in Brazil team apparently at one point, so you have to wonder about roster stability there. And I think there is some weak points on Navi's roster. Particularly, I think Edward is usually more of a burden than he is, a tool to use to be impactful and help the team. He's had his moments, but certainly you have to wonder if there's going to be some CIS shuffling going on with people like Adren and Hobbit out there. So maybe that could change for Navi. But again, Astralis Team Liquid certainly seem up there, and we have to kind of wait and see what happens with Mouse Sports, with Sticko's return, what's going to happen with FaZe, as they're going through a really rough patch right now, changing in-game leadership, potentially making a roster move down the road to replace Kerrigan seems to be what's in the cards. And in this environment, this really should be where Made in Brazil can maybe take advantage of some of that instability now that they've brought in their players, they brought in Yanko as a coach, or they have a coaching presence they haven't had in a very long time, an extra set of eyes, maybe new ideas, new ways to approach the game, try to make them more tactically diverse, try to help them build a new foundation, maybe get back to their roots in some ways, as I've already discussed, but also try to add new things and make use out of the aggressive rifling core they have between guys like Fer, Tarek, and Stewie 2K. All very aggressively prone riflers, can definitely swarm and trade bomb sites, and adding that explosive play element, like I said, that is somewhat reminiscent of what they had when they had Phelps. So there is a lot there. And what we've seen so far, look, I think it's just kind of too early to call how good Made in Brazil really is, because they can only beat who's put in front of them, and unfortunately for them, they haven't had a whole lot of cracks at some of the top teams. I mean, first of all, when they played at that, E-League Premier event, they had just brought Tarek on board, and obviously they lose to Liquid in 2 different best-of-3 series there. Then when they go to the Zotac Masters Hong Kong event, they didn't really get to play anybody noteworthy. I mean, Kingwon, who they beat in the finals 3-0, is definitely kind of a Tier 2 European team who's had some success, obviously just winning DreamHack Montreal, was doing pretty well in the Zotac European tournament, did pretty well at the Zotac Masters event to meet Made in Brazil in the finals. Sure, there's definitely some good things there about Kingwon, definitely some skilled players there like Mazzino and Rollin and Taz's leadership. There's definitely some good things about Kingwon, but yeah, they're not some top 10 team in the world. They're not some elite team that you're going to get a lot of credit for beating. And the other teams they beat there were Flash and VPPK, who were basically not really even competitive in those games. Particularly Flash got pounded. They only won 4 rounds in 2 maps played. So again, you're not going to get a whole lot of credit for winning the title on Zotac, but at least it gave them something to kind of help maybe run through some of their tactics, try to get comfortable playing official matches with the lineup, work on some of the things that they had been practicing during their boot camp. Definitely was useful, but just didn't really gain them any ground, I guess, in the rankings. Then when you go to the DreamHack Masters event they played at prior to the major, this was pretty good. I mean, they beat Hellraisers in groups, but I don't think Woxic was there yet. I think he didn't attend until later in the tournament. And then they beat Mouse Sports, which, beating Mouse Sports is good. They're another team kind of ranked in the top 5, but we all know the struggles that Mouse Sports have been having with the whole snack situation, which I've already talked about in a video about Mouse Sports I released earlier in the week before releasing this video. So it's a good win, but it doesn't really gain you that much ground. It doesn't get you nearer to the top 3, so to speak, but certainly helps you kind of get towards the top 5. And the only team that beat them at that event was Astralis, which is the greatest team in the world, so you can be somewhat forgiven for having that happen. Now at the major, look, they took care of business. They were able to beat Mouse Sports in G2 and best of ones. They lost to Astralis really heavily on Dust 2 though. I mean, they got 0 rounds. I mean, that's definitely not where you want to be, but again, losing to Astralis just like they did at the DreamHack Masters event in Stockholm, again, understandable. They want to take care of business in a nice best of 3 against NIP. I think NIP is a team that's kind of on the rise within the top 10. I think this was a great series. I think both teams played this series really well. Definitely saw some good things from both sides, and MIBR able to come out on top to get themselves into the playoffs. They beat Complexity, a team that was looking strong in the Americas Minor, looking strong in the group stages of the major. Since then, though, haven't been looking as good. Certainly didn't do well at the last LAN they attended, and really were struggling at some of the LANs earlier this year. So a decent win, but again, not really helping you move up or down the rankings considering where Complexity currently sits. And then they wound up losing in a series to Navi at the major in the semifinals, where they weren't really competitive in that game. Granted, again, Navi's ranked above you, just like Astralis is, so you're not really losing anything, but you're not gaining any ground, right? You're not getting those impressive best of 3 results that really inspire people to think that, you're chasing after greatness, that you're going to be one of the best teams in the world. I mean, you kind of are one of the best teams in the world because you're in the top 5, but as far as being the best, a team that can be considered favorites to win tournaments or, always be considered to make a deep run, it's hard to do that because it feels like anytime you face an Astralis, a Navi, or a Team Liquid, you're not going to be able to beat them if you have to meet them in a quarters or semifinal situation. And, outside of beating NIP in a best of 3, and playing Astralis close, which we're going to get into at the Blast Pro Series Istanbul, you still haven't proven that you're going to beat, the other elite teams on a regular basis to get you high placings and perhaps even get you trophy runs. And to, again, cap that off, we'll talk about how at the Blast Pro Series, yeah, they played well. I mean, they took care of business in the best ones they needed to. The only loss they took was, again, to Astralis, just like at the Major, just like at the DreamHack Masters event in Stockholm. And then they get to play Astralis in the best of 3 in the finals. And you know what? While they did lose the opening map on Train pretty huge, they beat Astralis on Overpass, which is insane because it's one of Astralis' best maps, and hardly anybody beats them on that. The only other map that seems harder to beat Astralis on than Overpass is Nuke. They're also quite good on Inferno. That might actually be a little bit better than an Overpass, actually, in most recent games. But yeah, this is a pretty quality win to be able to get a win on Overpass against Astralis. Definitely something that you have to be like, wow, okay, that's pretty damn good. And then they played them really close on Inferno. That was a very close championship between Made in Brazil and Astralis. Made in Brazil gave Astralis some of the most trouble they've had this year in a best of 3, outside of course, the losses to North that they had at Stockholm, or, some of the losses they've received to Navi and FaZe here and there throughout the year. But still a very good showing for Made in Brazil, but a loss is a loss at the end of the day. And while you come close and it looks impressive from an eye test, and it maybe makes people kind of see that potential that you have as a team, it's still not the results you need. If they would have been able to beat Astralis here in a best of 3, which not many people have been able to do, then that's when you're like, okay, man, like maybe this team's heating up. And I do think that they're heating up, but they just don't have that many series wins and best of 3, best of 5, what have you, to really promote much. But to be fair, pretty much every best of 3 they've played in, they've run up against Astralis at these big tournaments, like at DreamHack Masters Stockholm, like this Istanbul. The only time they haven't run up against them was when they had a chance at Navi at the Major and lost that one in a pretty one-sided fashion. But what I will say is that through all of this, at least Made in Brazil is showing you some signs that they do have some power behind their punch, that they could, in fact, eventually swing upwards and gain some ground, especially with some of the turbulence going on with some of the other lineups in the scene right now towards the top. For one, their map pool is somewhat shaping together. It seems like they have Cash as a pretty good option right now. They won it the last 4 times they've played it. They haven't beat too many good teams other than, NIP. That was a pretty good win. But their losses are only to Team Liquid. And Team Liquid might be the best Cash team in the world, to be honest with you. So at least their losses are only coming against teams that are really strong on the map. So Cash definitely seems to be kind of working their way up there. Does too. I thought for sure this was their best map, but you have to get a little bit worried with some of these losses. They lost to Navi once. They lost to Astralis twice. Yes, losing to those 2 teams is fair enough because Astralis is just so good, but the fact that you got 0 rounds against them certainly makes you a little bit shaky about how you feel about their Dust 2, but I certainly still think it's pretty good. They've been able to beat teams like Mousesports, Hellraisers. They've been able to rely on Dust 2 in other situations, so it's probably still a pretty good map, just maybe, not their leading map like they thought it should be. Maybe they have to look a different direction. Their Inferno, again, they haven't beat too many big opponents other than, like, say, Mousesports and a Complexity team that looked like kind of an Inferno specialist at the Major. But, again, their only losses are to Astralis and Team Liquid. They did have a loss to Tyloo as well, so that's a little bit of a rough loss. But, again, they're only losing to elite teams on Inferno, Dust 2, and Cash. Their Mirage, haven't played enough to really know too much about it. They have beaten Space Soldiers and Mouse and tied NIP and lost to NIP. Historically, this core has always really liked to play Mirage, so you would like to think that's kind of in their wheelhouse, but still too soon to call that map. They don't play Nuke. Overpass, they're 1-3, but that's pretty deceiving because they've beaten Astralis once, and then their losses are to Astralis, Navi, and Team Liquid, which Team Liquid's not like a super strong Overpass team, I think they're a little bit better than maybe people might give them credit for, and that their record indicates, just because of kind of watching them play and seeing what they've been able to accomplish on the map to some degree. From an eye test, it seems like maybe that could be a map they can rely on later on down the road. But certainly, Astralis and Navi are really good overpass teams. And then when it comes to Train, again, both their losses are to Astralis. They've been able to beat teams like Complexity and NIP on Train. So again, when you look at that map pool, it seems like it's wide, and we don't know how deep it is, though. Like, they're certainly capable of playing Cash, Dust 2, Inferno, Mirage, Train. Even Overpass, they looked somewhat impressive on that win against Astralis over at the Blast Pro Series in Istanbul. But the problem is A, the sample size is really small, so it's really hard to know exactly how good they are in some of these maps they show maybe some strengths on. And again, if you're constantly losing to elite level teams every time you play an elite level team on these maps, then you're never going to gain any ground, right? Like, you kind of just get top 5 just kind of because, you're only losing to elite teams, but you're never going to gain that ground, to get towards first, get towards the best team in the world, unless you're able to finally get some wins against those teams, which they really haven't been able to do other than the Overpass win over Astralis, basically. So at least there's something to work with, though, right? At least we kind of see that they're capable of playing these maps, that they have tactics for these maps, that they're figuring things out strategically, and that they at least feel comfortable playing them, or at least from an eye test, it seems like they're comfortable playing them. And then as far as, tactically speaking, it was just how I'm going to kind of end this video to talk about how the roster is configured, how they're using all the pieces they have. And I'll run you through some maps as kind of examples, is, again, this team takes cues from different lineups of this Brazilian course past. They do have the ability to play slower defaults, which is what was really the foundation of the team during their most successful era. But they have those explosive elements that kind of take hints from that Phelps lineup. And what I mean by that is that Fallen has become much more of a support player on T side, which is very reminiscent of the backseat he kind of took when Phelps was on the team, because he kind of let Phelps and Fur go forward. He kind of came, backwards, kind of help support those two guys, particularly like how they took mid control on Mirage, for instance, if you want to talk about, like, with Fur and Phelps just kind of leading the way in connector, Phelps boosting window room, Fallen just kind of sitting back and supporting that idea, throwing some utility in the A bomb site to help with setups and things like that. He takes a lot of the same role on Terrorist side. I want to be specific that it's mostly on the T side, because CT side's a little bit different. But on the T side, with those riflers coming forward, he really has been more throwing utility, more setting those guys up. He's actually first in the last few months in flash assists per round, and he's in the top 3 with flash success, which is considered, average flash opponents per flashbang thrown. So in some of these, supportive categories, like, throwing flashbangs and flash assists, he's actually up there. He's actually, doing a pretty good job facilitating his players with utility. Cold's also in the top 15 to 20 players in doing this over the last few months as well. Even some of the other guys like Stewie and Tarek, on certain maps, they've had to take more of supportive roles, because it seems map specific how Tarek and Stewie are used. Even they're, doing a decent job with their flash usage. And so this is certainly good news for the team going forward. And to kind of elaborate on this whole idea on things being map specific for guys like Stewie, 2K, and Tarek, and some of the other players as well, let's take Cash, one of the maps that they've been pretty successful on when you look at their map pool. For the team on the T side, Cold's playing a very similar position to what he's played throughout most of his career on Cash, playing outside the B bomb site, used to cut off rotations in middle, more of a supportive element. Fallen has taken a bit of a step back with his AWP on T side, not necessarily going for initial picks as often, again, more of a support guy throwing utility for executes and mid control and things like that. Now, this is a map where Tarek and Fur are kind of the entry combo. They're the ones that seem to be taking a lot of the entries into the A bomb site on executes there, are taking mid control, and you're seeing Stu 2K play the squeaky door, playing more of a peripheral role, something he never really did on Cloud9. I mean, I think maybe occasionally he'd play outside the B bomb site for Cloud9 when they were trying different things out, but, mostly a guy that was taking up middle or leading execute, so he's definitely taking a little bit of a backseat compared to what he's used to. And he still can be used, obviously, on certain executes, though. Again, when this team wants to be explosive and just do something fast-paced, they can just put him with Tarek and Fur, unleash them with some utility, and look to swarm and trade a bomb site, which they've shown they can do. I saw some really good Molly executes that they've been able to throw. Like, Molly is like covering the whole A bomb site by quad, by the MBK corner, good smoke wall variations and flashes to come in, can mix in some explosive B plays like the nip wall of fire on the checkers area to really clear out that entire area, as well as put Mollies all over the bomb site. Definitely can have some high utility executes as well as be able to play default in the positions I was talking about. So they definitely show some tactical diversity on this map. And again, in this map, you're seeing Tarek and Fur kind of be the forefront of the rifling core. Now, when you switch to another map, like let's say Mirage, someone like Tarek actually just kind of plays outside the A bomb site. Stewie still kind of playing a peripheral role in the B apartments, and this is where Colds takes more of an action with Fur and Fallen in the mid area when they're going for this default mid control. Obviously, they go for a wide array of like 1-4 aggressive plays, where Stewie might solo out while the rest are just kind of swarming and trading a bomb site, which is where Tarek will get more engaged rather than default, where maybe he just kind of plays outside the A bomb site. But again, they have a decent mixture of default play as well as executes, and you know they have some good plays just all across the board. Now, when you go to a map like Overpass, again, Tarek isn't really at the forefront of this map. He's playing more towards Monster outside the B-bomb sites. Stewie kind of playing stairs, again, playing another solo role, something he didn't really have to do throughout a lot of his career. And you're seeing, again, Cold kind of come to the forefront, playing middle with Fur and Fallen. And by the way, these are positions Cold always held. Like, even though he's always been considered a late round, more clutch player, more passive rifler, on maps like Overpass and Mirage, he was always a little bit more active on T side than, say, a Cash. Or say some of these other maps that are in the map pool. And so they're really kind of taking cues to that. And again, Fallen kind of sitting in the background, being more supportive. Again, on this map, we've seen them do some really cool nade stacks, kind of taking cues from Astralis, mixing in some faster paced B plays where they can actually use all of their rifling core like Tarek, Stewie, and Fur to swarm in, while guys like Fallen and Cold sit back, throw utility, kind of support them, kind of play towards the late round. So even if they have maps where they're sticking Tarek and Stewie in positions they haven't normally had to play, in certain executes are still able to utilize them the way that they want to be used and the way that makes the most sense. Now, with all this said, you know, for one, it's good that they have role diversity with guys like Tarek and Stewie who can kind of swap between being entry type players, swap to being more peripheral players. The problem is that while that flexibility can be great, because, you know, that means you can react to things very quickly on the edge of the map. You can follow up things faster because you have entry aggressive rifles there that are comfortable going in and trying to go for duels and try to go for openings. And that gives you that flexibility. It's a similar thing that Liquid has going on because they seem to kind of interchange Twist and NAF a lot on who's playing the edge of the map, who's more a part of the entry force. Use both of them, though, very aggressively and executes. There's definitely a lot of similarities in that regard. But the one pitfall of that is your default ever going to be as well-grounded as a team that has very specific set roles, like, say, an Astralis on their defaults, particularly because not only do they have set spots, but those guys are some of the best in those spots. Like, they're very comfortable playing those roles. Like, Xipix is very comfortable playing a peripheral role. You know, Mages is very comfortable playing a solo rifling spot on T sides. But are guys like Stewie and Tarek comfortable doing that long term? Can they learn to be comfortable with it? Is it more of just making a sacrifice for the greater good of the team because other guys need to be doing other things? You know, what is the extent of that? What is the ceiling on playing that way, on having guys play these spots that maybe they're not as comfortable with or as well known for? You know, is there a cap? Can they break past that cap just through sheer time spent, sheer practice and will, and the mentality to be willing to put up with that, but knowing that you're still going to get yours on certain executes? You know, you have to kind of wonder how that will all balance out, and if eventually changes have to be made just to make better roles for playing default type play style whenever you do have to go to that. And just to, you know, kind of end this, on the CT side, though, this is where Fallen's op can become more active. This is where he can try to play a more dynamic, mobile opping role, similar to a device or something like that, where he can actually flex his AWP a little bit. And he's actually been playing pretty well at most of these events. He was pretty good at DreamHack Masters. He was pretty good at the Major up until the Navi series. Obviously, you know, did fine at the Zotac event and was really doing fine at Blast up until that best of 3 series against Astralis. You know, when he had to play against Astralis, that's where he kind of tanked off with the AWP a little bit. But, you know, again, at least he's able to come to the forefront with the op on CT sides and most of the games that they've played, and hopefully he can get his footing against a team like Astralis, so it's very hard to do that. But when it comes to player performance, that's another thing to think about, is the fact that, yeah, Fallen's been kind of growing and Cold seems to be kind of getting back to good position. Tarek's actually been playing pretty well also, generally speaking, but guys like Stewie and Fur have been hit or miss at times. And I would have thought that, you know, Fur would still be able to perform. I know he's had his issues, but, you know, you were thinking that this play style they're playing, how they're still letting him still keep basically all of his T spots, it's really been guys like Stewie and Tarek who have had to make the most adjustments, that hopefully he would thrive a little bit more. And I think they need him to, if they're truly going to take steps forward and become a more successful team. And then, yeah, like the fact that Stewie isn't performing as well, you have to wonder how much of that is because he's just in spots he's not used to having to play, having to do things he's not used to having to do. You know, the transition period of adjusting to having to do those types types of things and how that will fare on the long term, if he'll ever be able to get back to performing really well, having to play positions like that, or again, if further changes will have to be made for the team or for Stewie, for himself personally, for his career going forward individually. Those are all questions still yet to be answered. But I guess the point is that this team has shown some good signs. They've shown some ability to play the game. They're only really losing to elite level teams. The sample size is still really too small to know exactly how good they are against some of these teams or on some of these maps in their map pool, but they've definitely shown the ability to look comfortable playing most of these maps that they've been playing. Like, they seem very comfortable at least 5 out of the 7 maps, and maybe even 6. That just depends on how Overpass looks going forward as they play it more. But certainly the other maps they look pretty comfortable on outside of a map they don't play, which is Nuke. They look much improved on Inferno compared to previous iterations of this team. Seems like that Stewie Fallen combo at the B-bomb side on CT side has really been able to play better CT defense than previous iterations of this team have been able to do, and just generally seem to perform better on that map. They've maintained their cash. They seem to still be comfortable playing Mirage. So there's a lot there. They do have a lot of firepower. They've shown some tactical diversity with Yanko's coaching, Fallen shot calling, taking, again, different elements of the team from different time periods and kind of mixing them together and making the most out of the players that they have and trying to play to their strengths. But at other times, guys having to make sacrifices to still be able to have some type of default foundation down. And again, like, I think that this team has upside. I think when you think of the current environment they're in with teams like Mousesports, FaZe, maybe even Navi, maybe having some roster issues, if they can remain stable, they can work through it all. I think we'll definitely see them at more bigger events. They seem to be doing fine in ECS and EPL, so those are lands they should qualify for. I'm sure we'll see them at other bigger events as well coming up, and we'll just have to see how they perform. Right now, it's right there for the taking for them. Outside of Astralis being firmly at the top, outside of Liquid, doing really, really well, I think there's a lot of room for this team to grow. They just need to get the wins. They actually need to do more than just look like they're playing close against Astralis, but maybe actually beat them. They need the W's to rank up more. But again, I think there's a lot of positive notes there. I think they can possibly do it. And yeah, I just want to talk through a little bit about their pursuit towards greatness, what they've been working on, how things have looked so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.